Me 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 me. 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 Me 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 me. Me 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 me. Me 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 me. 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 Me 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 me.
Sonia had spent months in the camp and had heard people tell tales of all corners of this continent. All of these stories layered themselves together in her mind to form a mental map of the realm. Unfortunately, one thing was immediately evident. She was a long way away from Scorpion's citadel in the mountain. She needed to move fast. Once the camp realised she was gone, they would undoubtedly send bounty hunters after her. She knew she had two initial options. She could head north, passing through the heart of the desert. It was large, barren, and speckled with hostile settlements that she would need to avoid. It did, however, provide one advantage. A large highway that ran right through the centre of it would allow her to travel quickly, and time was of the essence if she was to warn Scorpion and his people before the attack. Alternatively, she could take the road along the southern edge of the Red-Hide Cliffs. This would mean spending a lot of time travelling off the roads through the estuaries at the eastern foot of the cliffs, which would slow her down considerably. However, she also had no food and no weapons. She wouldn't be of any use to anyone if she didn't survive the journey. The southern path did pass by one settlement, Lobster's Keep on the Expanse, who were unlikely to be openly hostile to her. If she could scavenge some trade-worthy materials along the path, she might be able to trade them for some food. Along with this, the eastern edge of the cliffs featured a peninsula covered in jungle. She would likely be able to forage for food while passing through this area, something she would not be able to do in the desert. With the pros and cons weighed up, she elected to travel the southern path. It would be slower, but would give her more options, and after all, she was no use as a messenger if she was dead. She set off at speed, following the road north to the Hittodom Sea before turning east, following the road along the way. Whilst on your travels, let's get to know her a little better. She was a member of the New Kingdom, which is run by Scorpion. She grew up travelling the kingdom's lands with her family and their animal companions, picking up work where they could. It was Sonia's responsibility to ensure that the fire was always going at their camp. A year ago, she wandered too far from the camp in search of more firewood and was captured by a band of roving bandits masquerading as guards. They sold her into slavery in one of the Cultivar Reem's diamond mines in the desert, where we have joined her. She's a bit squeamish and has a love of fine food, so life on the road was never the easiest for her. She'll have to embrace it now though if she wants to stand a chance of warning Scorpion in time. Her people follow the way of the land, meaning that they view animals as existing on a comparable level to humans, and view consuming animal meat as much the same as cannibalism. With no time to farm and a refusal to hunt, this means Sonia's food supplies will be limited to what she can forage and what she can buy. After a rough night of sleeping in the sand, she continued on her way, stopping a short way into the morning to survey her surroundings for signs of anything she could use to barter once she got to the settlement. After a brief survey of the area, she spotted some onyx embedded in the rock face. She tried to extract it, but mining had never been an area she was particularly skillful in, so it was an exceedingly long process. The frustration of the mining attempts, mixed with the building hunger and the generally horrible situation she had found herself in, led Sonia to a mental breakdown. Thankfully, she had spent so long trying to extract the onyx that she was already extremely tired, and soon fell asleep, forgetting her worries for a little while. After a short nap, she returned to her endeavour and managed to extract a small handful of onyx. With malnutrition setting in, she could ill afford to extract any more, and instead set off for the settlement, determined to reach it before her hunger could bring her to an end. Arriving at Lobster's Keep on the Expanse, she found they had little use for the onyx and would only pay a pittance for it. She traded it for a measly 8 prickly pears, barely enough to keep her going. But keep her going they would have to. All the other settlements would be openly hostile. If she tried to approach them, they would likely capture her and bring her back to the camp for the bounty. With nothing else to trade, and still feeling the looming threat of starvation, her only option was to rush towards the jungle in the hopes of foraging some food once she was there. She followed the road a fair part of the way, turning off into the wilds just before reaching one of the hostile settlements, aiming to give it a wide berth. She spent another long, cold night huddled in the sand of the desert, planning to start early the next day to make it to the jungle before malnutrition could take her. As she was making her plans, a caravan passed nearby. Hoping to satiate her hunger, she emerged from her sandy hiding spot and asked about their wares. Sadly, the caravan had nothing to offer her in the way of food, diminishing her hopes just that little bit more. She continued on her way to the jungle. However, now that she had left the road, her progress was slower, and she missed out on making it to the jungle just before she was forced to lay down and rest. She had little distance to go the next day before she arrived at the foot of the great trees of the jungle. She was still a whole continent away from Scorpion's citadel, but at least now she might be able to find some food to power through the rest of the journey. Looking around the jungle, she immediately spotted orange trees, banana trees, and berry bushes. With nature's bounty gleaming in her eyes, she dashed to the nearest orange tree and started tearing them straight from the branches and shoveling them into her mouth. With her stomach finally filled, she began to take stock of the area around her. There were a pack of llamas nearby, and she elected to ask one for help in her journey. The nomadic lifestyle she would be required to live for the foreseeable future could be made a lot easier by having a sturdy companion alongside her to help carry the weight of the food they would need. Sonia's powers of persuasion were creative. But hey, they seemed to do the trick. The llama hadn't interacted with a being like Sonia before, so Sonia bestowed him with a name from her people, so that he would feel like part of her tribe. As such, the llama was named Steven. Sonia spent a little more time collecting together some berries and then slept, safe and content in her freedom and with a full belly for the first time in a long time. Sonia was ever conscious of her need to travel fast, but with a lot more barren land ahead in the future, this was too good of an opportunity to pass up to stockpile some much needed resources. As well as food, she gathered up some wood to fashion into a bow and a club. If any bounty hunters ever caught up to her, she would be ready for them. And not a moment too soon either. A hunter soon approached her rest area. Eager to not let him have the power in the situation, Sonia moved towards his position to begin taking shots at him. She lands a good couple of shots, but she's not well versed in combat and panics. Turning to one of the other llamas in the nearby herd, she quickly convinces it to help her out. With the bounty hunter already struggling under the weight of his injuries, a few swift kicks to the head from the llama put him down for good. While he bleeds out, she steals his clothes and armour. She finds treating humans callously comes quite naturally. Realising that the hunter had some actual armour, she also decides to don it, to help protect her from any future attempts to take her back to the camp. The arrival of the bounty hunter was just further proof that she had spent too much time here, so she collected together the last of the food she had foraged, along with the spare clothes from the hunter, and began to set off for the other side of the jungle. She also made sure to pack her wooden horseshoe pin. It would be vital to keep her entertained along the way. She would stop at the other edge of the jungle to gather some more food before setting out across the estuaries at the foot of the Red-Hide Cliffs. Despite the estuaries, that area was quite barren, and the tricky terrain would make for slow progress, so it was important to have enough supplies. Setting off with Steven at her side, she didn't feel so despondent anymore. It was nice to have the company. It was a long 5 days before they made it to the other side of the jungle, but their supplies lasted the distance, so they made it without any other stops, aside from the short sleeps at night. They set up a camp and prepared to begin foraging. No sooner had Sonia set up her horseshoe ring than a human fell from the sky next to her. She recognised the markings of a faction that are hostile to her people, and immediately rushes over to steal their possessions before leaving them to bleed out in the swamp. With Stephen now in tow, Sonia wanted to prepare to make sure they both had enough food for the next leg of the journey. To this end, she began chopping down nearby trees to fashion into drying racks for some grass. She could use these racks to transform the grass into straw, which would keep for a very long time and provide sufficient nutrition for Stephen, meaning that she can keep any of the food they foraged to sustain herself. And there was no shortage of grass nearby to process. Another bounty hunter had managed to track them through the jungle and approached to try and apprehend Sonia. Thankfully, the jungle is home to many wonderful and powerful hunters of its own. Sonia approached a nearby tiger and requested its help in dealing with the bounty hunter. The tiger, aggravated by the presence of this smelly, scruffy human in its territory, was all too happy to help. It made short work of the bounty hunter, tearing the whole left-hand side of their body to shreds. The next morning, a couple of friendly visitors approached Sonia's location, offering some small items in trade. Parting with some of the items she had taken from the humans who had fallen in her presence, she was able to purchase some pemmican, a long-lasting food which would be very helpful in her journey across the desert. That said, it did contain meat, so would likely be best kept to sustain Stephen if they ran out of hay. While it had been nice to enjoy some fresh fruit straight from the planet, Sonia decided to start cooking some meals. It would reduce the chance of her getting sick from the raw food, and the fire would be a nice source of heat during the night. It would really help to bring the whole camp together. As she slept, Sonia heard a loud bang, similar to when that human had fallen from the sky. Upon investigating, she found an injured Arctic coyote. Eager to help her animal friend, she carried him back to her camp and tended to his wounds. Sonia had hoped to fill 3 drying racks with grass to process into hay. However, 2 days into her time here, she had only managed to fill 2. These would take roughly 3 days to process as well, so she simply couldn't stay here for the length of time it would take to process a third. While the grass processed, however, she could create some additional items for herself, such as a wooden toilet and a basin in which to store water. With Stephen's help, she would be able to carry these with her while she travelled, so would only have to build them once. As they'd been together a while now, Stephen's coat was quite long, so Sonia sheared it to help him deal with the heat of the jungle. A side effect of this was that she now had some llama fur with which she could craft. On their 3rd day in the area, Stephen was struck down with the plague. She wouldn't risk him succumbing to it, so they would need to stay here until he was better. The hay wasn't ready yet, so they couldn't leave either way, but she was hoping he would recover quickly so that it didn't hold them up too much. She made sure to tend to him carefully and make sure he got plenty of rest. Sonia elected to use some of the fur she had sheared from Stephen to craft herself a bedroll. This would allow her to get a better rest than simply lying on the ground, and she could use it while travelling. The better the rest she got, the less time she would have to spend doing it, and thus the faster they could travel. As the last of the hay was collected and Stephen recovered from his illness, it was time to move on. Sonia began collecting up all the food she had foraged and uninstalling the equipment she could take with her. After one final rest, she began to plan out the next step of her journey. She would head north, skirting the bottom of the Red-Hide Cliffs, through the estuaries and into the Deadlands, an area ripe with noxious air. She would need to pass through the Deadlands quickly, so would make for the road in their centre and follow it north, making sure to skirt any hostile encampments along the way. Between herself and Stephen, they shouldered all of the equipment and food and loaded up any items they thought may be able to trade or sell off. They made slow progress through the Deadlands, which meant they'd spent far too long breathing in the noxious air. They would need to make great haste along the road to find some fresh air before they succumbed to its effects. They managed to escape the harsh environment mere moments before night would fall, and they would have been forced to spend the night there, likely succumbing to the dangers in the process. They slept by the road that night, thankful for the fresh air. The next day they continued north, avoiding the first settlement on the road in favour of approaching the second, more friendly settlement, looking to trade. The settlement sadly didn't have any vegetarian food for Sonia to eat, however they did have a duck for sale. Eager to add an extra friend to their party, and a source of eggs, she parted with some of the food she'd stockpiled, along with some of the spare clothes, and purchased the duck to join her and Stephen. Continuing along the road, they decided to stop for the night and set up camp. Having gotten to know the duck better along the way, Sonia offered the duck the name of Danielle, which she loved, and thus the duck was named. Sonia directed them to hide a little bit off the main road to make them harder to spot by any passers-by, and they set up camp against the ruins of an ancient building. This area had some goods worth foraging, but not a plentiful supply. As such, Sonia chose to erect a small lean-to in which she could store her goods and stop them from deteriorating out in the elements. Sadly, her construction skills weren't fantastic, but she would get there eventually, and hey, there was no time like the present to practice. Sadly, it's not long before disaster strikes. A nearby coyote gets an insatiable hunger for duck and starts tearing into Danielle. Sonia rushes to try and help, but sadly it's much too late. The coyote leaves with a full belly, and Sonia leaves with only a smattering of blood with which to remember her friend. While Sonia is still reeling from the death of Danielle, another bounty hunter stumbles across her camp and moves in to try and capture her. Turning her anger at the situation upon the bounty hunter, she demands the help of a nearby lioness, hoping to watch it inflict Danielle's fate upon the hunter. However, it appears that Sonia underestimated the hunter, and he seems to be taking the better side of the engagement with the lioness. Sonia runs over to try and help out, desperate to not feel responsible for the death of another animal friend. Sadly, she's only in time to avenge the lioness. At least the lioness left a body behind to bury, unlike Danielle. Sonia dug a grave and held a small ceremony to thank the lioness for giving its life to defend her. She left the hunter to rot in the sun. After a long and restless night spent in the rain, Sonia finally managed to put a door and a roof on the lean-to. It would provide a safe place for her small stockpile, as well as an area to keep her out of the rain and, in the worst case scenario, a place for Steven to take refuge, should any of the other predators in the area begin to see him as a prospective meal. Sadly, as Sonia was about to begin her first night in an actual shelter, her joy was interrupted as a local gazelle attacked her. Driven mad by something, there was no reasoning with it, much as she tried. The only option left was for her to pick up her bow. She was unable to land an arrow before the gazelle closed the gap, but thankfully Sonia had prepared for this situation and grabbed hold of her wooden club and started swinging. It wasn't a quick or painless process, but Sonia emerged victorious, with mostly superficial wounds. Having collected more of Steven's fur, Sonia now had enough to fashion into a backpack. This would allow her to carry more of the burden of their stock herself. It would be unfair to expect Steven to carry everything for her. While out collecting some peaches from a nearby tree, Sonia broke down again. Between the deaths of her animal friends, the sickness from the build-up of the toxic residue in her lungs, and the dire nature of her situation, it was all a bit much. While on a sad wander, she did however stumble across a herd of zebra nearby, which gave her an idea. If she could convince one of the zebra to join her on her adventure, she might be able to ride it, increasing her movement speed significantly. The zebra wasn't too willing to leave its herd on the first try, but it would be worth spending a few extra days in the area to try and convince it, if it meant speeding up the rest of the journey. Concerned for his safety after the Danielle incident, Sonia asked Steven to stay inside the lean-to. There was plenty in there for him to eat for the time being. Attempt number 2 at convincing the zebra to join was also a bust. They just weren't buying what Sonia was selling. One evening, while Sonia was cooking her dinner, she hears screams for help coming from nearby and looks around to see somebody being chased by a member of the faction which had locked her up. Eager to help someone escape the fate she had endured, she shouted over and offered to help them fight off the pursuer. Sonia let arrows fly at the pursuer and they engage in a prolonged fight. Sonia isn't able to keep him at a great distance and ends up taking a few hits, but after she lands a lucky blow on him, he's no longer able to keep pace with her, and she manages to pick him off while keeping her distance. Once they go down, Sonia steals their clothes, their sword, and their quiver, and leaves them to bleed out. Grateful for the rescue, Key decides to join Sonia in her quest. As they calm down following the attack, Sonia and Key get to know each other a little bit better. The rest of Key's people were already captured or killed, so she wants to help those who would resist the cult of her Rim too. Key grew up in a large system of caves beneath some mountains in the west. Her time in the caves had left her feeling a little exposed when out in the great doors, which may prove to cause her additional stress as they travel, especially as she was also a little neurotic. With her people dealing with constant attacks from the cult, she had taken up being a healer as her people needed constant medical attention. The constant attacks also meant she had learned to sleep through just about anything and was notoriously difficult to wake up. As Sonia is a better shot than Key, they trade each other for their backpacks, allowing Sonia to carry the quiver while Key carries the backpack. With an extra mouth to feed now and the forageable food in the area running low, they decide they'll need to move on soon. They start stockpiling cooked meals and gather up as much of the remaining food as they can. Sonia has one more go at convincing a zebra to join them, but has no success. Just as they're about to call it a day on this area and leave, a number of small meteorites fall nearby, one made of pure gold. Given Key's mining ability, they elect to extract some of the gold from it for trading along the road. They don't manage to extract much though, as they don't wish to linger here for too long. They begin packing up all their belongings, including a table and stool which Sonia had made for them to eat at, and plan out their next move. There's a settlement they can trade with not too far north, and, with their new supply of gold, they're eager to see if they can purchase anything that might help them on their way. On the way to the settlement, Sonia begins to explain the route she thinks they should take to Key. It involves following the road north, into the centre of the continent, before turning east. This will allow them to travel quickly to the centre, followed by a short jaunt over rough terrain eastwards until they reach another road network which they can follow almost the whole way to their destination. Arriving at the settlement, they part with anything of value, and briefly consider purchasing a camel, but think better of it. They're concerned about their food supplies, and a camel would quickly consume what little they had left. Besides, with two of them to carry, a single camel probably wouldn't make much difference. Instead they settle for some cloth with which to build Key a bedroll of her own, and some herbal medicine, in case of injury or infection. With their purchases complete, they continue north, being sure to avoid any hostile settlements along the way. With a little silver in their pocket from their last trade, they stop at a nearby settlement to examine their wares. Here they invest in a warbow, which will allow Sonia to strike any attackers from a greater distance, reducing the chance of attackers getting close enough to deal damage to them. They also purchase a couple of bottles of wine, deciding that they probably deserve a little bit of a treat after all they've been through, and in anticipation of all that was yet to come. With food running a little low, they take a short detour away from the road to set up in a short-term camp to forage some food. After a bit of light flirting between Key and Sonia, they decide to go on a little date. It seems to be going well, until Key vomits all over the ground and Sonia suggests to get back to gathering up resources. They create plans to erect another lean-to to protect their belongings while they collect as much food as they can from the environment. The area contains many precious stones as well as an abundance of wild healroot, both of which they decide to collect before moving on. As they're enjoying the peace of this bountiful new land, a bounty hunter from Bandar catches up to them yet again. This time, Sonia elects to test out her new warbow. Although her first two shots fly wide, her third lands clean, the extra power of the new bow doing massive damage to the hunter, almost tearing his right arm completely off. A second arrow pierces his sternum, making a complete mess of his insides. It's only a matter of time now before he died, but Sonia wasn't about to wait around and watch. She launches one more arrow which puts him down immediately. Conscious that bounty hunters have already found their location, they make haste to gather up the remaining precious materials and begin deconstructing their camp, ready to move on. Before moving on though, they decide to have a second attempt at their first date, going on a little walk through the forest and chatting to each other. It seems to go well. Better than the first attempt at any rate. They soon set off, packing up onyx, rubies, emeralds, and gold they'd managed to collect, along with some food, and set off to the next nearest settlement to trade some of their new wealth. They used some of this wealth to purchase a cow. Although they had been reluctant to add an extra mouth to feed to their little group, there was a method to this. The cow could be fed grass and hay, which neither Sonia nor Key could eat, and, in return, it would produce milk, which Sonia and Key could eat. It made sense to have the cow with them on the road, to help provide additional options for sustenance. Planning out the next phase of their journey, they set off along the road once more, although they would soon have to abandon it to continue east. They passed through another area of noxious air, but were able to make haste through it, leading to only a minor buildup of toxins in their lungs. Nothing to worry about. Reaching the eastern point of their current road, they left it behind and set off into the wilds. By Sonia's calculations, they were roughly halfway to their end goal from where she had started. It had taken them a long time to get this far, and she was beginning to fear they might not make it in time. While out in the wilds, they did encounter some traders. They used some of their remaining silver to buy some pemmican from them, just to keep their stockpiles full. Making it to the eastern road, they took a short journey south to trade at the nearby settlement. However, the settlement had little of interest to them, so they soon set off north once more, planning out their route on the large road that would take them most of the way to their destination. They were approaching a section of the road that passes through the Ullana's Body Desert. Although the road would make the travel time through the desert shorter, there was only hostile settlements on the far side. As such, they thought it would make sense to stop off in the fertile lands just before the desert, to forage and stockpile as much food as they could before setting off into it. As soon as they arrive, they outline a small shelter and set up their equipment. Sonia and Key are feeling quite comfortable and confident. They just wanted to spend a short time here to gather food before heading across. Unfortunately, they had failed to account for one thing. As they slept through the first night in this new area, winter began. The temperatures immediately began to drop well below freezing, so they moved their campfire inside the shelter to benefit from its heat. Without somewhere for Stephen and the cow to stay, they were at risk of roaming away too far and getting lost. For the time being, Sonia put them in the shelter until they could build a safe area for them. They also decided to name the cow Josephine, as they had all become fast friends. With the cold of winter setting in, all of the berry bushes were dying, leaving the guys without a good source of food. They set up some more drying racks for grass. As long as they could keep Josephine fed with straw, they would have some milk to consume, but it would be hard for them to stockpile any additional foodstuffs. Just to exacerbate the situation, Josephine was then struck down with the plague. They would need to tend her well to make sure she survived. They couldn't risk losing any of her milk production. The cold was putting a bit of a dampener on their moods, but Key and Sonia still found time to enjoy each other's company. With some grass set to drying on the racks, they would now be stuck here for at least 3 more days, until it was ready to be used. As the group cut more grass to try and process into straw, another group of meteorites landed nearby, 2 of which were made of gold. As there aren't many more friendly settlements between them and their final goal, they may not have many opportunities left to trade. However, as they were stuck here for the time being, Key decided to mine out all the gold, on the off chance that they meet another caravan while on the road that they can trade with. Shortly after the meteorite impact, a slaver arrives, intent on capturing Sonia and Key and selling them off. Sonia marches out into the field to meet him, encouraging a mega sloth to accompany her on the way. A shot from Sonia almost rips the slaver's arm off, which allows the mega sloth to simply push him over with one massive paw. With little else to do in the winter cold, Key makes quick work of the gold mining, using it as an excuse to get some heat in her bones. As time passes, the other animals in the area are beginning to feel the lack of food too, and a warg takes to hunting Sonia. Wargs are extremely dangerous beasts, but Sonia has a little time to react. She manages to get herself behind the fence and lines up an arrow on it. She's only going to get one shot. Whether through luck or skill, Sonia manages to thread the arrow between the warg's bones and straight through its heart, destroying it entirely in mere seconds. With the hay almost ready, they begin to dismantle the camp. They haven't really managed to stockpile any helpful amount of food, but they aren't going to find any more here while winter rages on, so they simply have to take their chances crossing the desert now, and hope they find a way to feed themselves as they go. To their delight, they encounter another caravan just as they enter the desert. Sadly, the hope proves to be false, as the caravan aren't willing to part with any of their food. As they approach the edge of the desert, malnutrition has started to set in. Even if they can make it past the desert, they'll still struggle to source food, as it's still the deepest of winter. Things are starting to get desperate. Just escaping the desert, they can't afford to wait, as Sonia is already incapacitated due to malnutrition, unable to continue under her own steam. Key desperately searches for any food to forage, but there's none in sight. Then she remembers it's been a while since they milked Josephine. She quickly milks her and feeds the milk to Sonia. It isn't much, but it will stave off death for a little while longer. Now they have options. They don't bother setting up camp here, things are getting too desperate. Instead they set off again, leaving the road that will take them to their destination in favour of travelling through the wilds to reach a nearby settlement where they hope to be able to purchase some food. Fearful that they won't even make it as far as that settlement, they set up camp for the night. No sooner have they settled down than a couple of mad rats try it and attack them, but Sonia made light work of the poor beasts. Thankfully the frost hadn't fully set in here, and some of the berry bushes still had their bounties available for the taking. They just managed to fill their bellies and then immediately set off towards the settlement once more. Arriving late the next day, they were able to sell off some more of their belongings and purchase some meat. If Sonia had to resort to eating meat, it would put her in a foul mood, but with winter proving as harsh as it had, and their building desire to reach their destination, she might just have to deal with it for a while. With some food secured, they set off down the road again. With one more area of noxious air to cross, they rest just outside it, eager to get through it in one go the next day so as to avoid breathing it in all night while they sleep. Over a year after her escape from prison, Sonia was within sight of the citadel. She surged forward, eager to deliver her message of warning.
Me. Me. Me.
Hello guys, Tuna here. I hope you enjoyed this small single episode series. Apologies it was delayed by a week, I've just been ridiculously busy and was also determined to get this whole story into one video instead of spreading it across two, so that you guys can just sit down and watch all in one go. I'm thankfully off work this week coming, so should have plenty of time to work on the start of the next series, which I have a fun idea for. And I'll hopefully be able to get that out to you next Saturday without any issues. Until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful week, and thank you once again just for watching.